The Australian outback is a vast, enigmatic place, a desert of infinite red sands and boundless horizons. For years, stories have been whispered about its untamed wilds, about creatures that lurk just beyond the reach of firelight, and shadows that stretch too far in the moonlight. But those were just tales, weren't they? I was an amateur filmmaker, traveling to the outback for a documentary project on Australia's lesser-known myths. My guide, Lucas, was a rugged local with a skeptical smile and a wealth of knowledge about the land. He laughed off my interest in the supernatural. "Mate, it's just the heat and the isolation that gets to people," he said as we loaded our gear into his battered 4x4. "But hey, if you're chasing ghost stories, the outback's got plenty." Our destination was an abandoned mining settlement called Black Hollow. Once a booming opal town, it was deserted decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. The locals refused to discuss it, dismissing the deaths as accidents or the result of minor squabbles. But there was a deeper unease in their eyes, a tension that hinted at something they didn't want to say. It took us 2 days to reach Black Hollow. The journey was grueling, the heat relentless, and the desolation unsettling. The radio lost signal hours before we arrived, leaving us with only the sound of the engine and the ever-present wind. By the time we reached the settlement, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the crumbling buildings. Black Hollow was eerie in its silence. The remnants of the town consisted of a few dilapidated shacks, a rusting water tower, and the yawning black mouth of the old mine. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as if the place was holding its breath. We set up camp near the water tower and Lucas built a fire. As we ate, I asked him about the stories surrounding the town. "They say the miners dug too deep," he said, his voice low. "Found something they shouldn't have. After that, people started disappearing. First it was just 1 or 2. Then entire families." "What did they find?" I asked. Lucas shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say it was a cursed opal. Others reckon it was something alive." That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the hollowed-out buildings, carrying with it faint, indistinct whispers. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and forced myself to focus on the project. At dawn we explored the mine. The entrance was partially caved in, but we managed to squeeze through. Inside, the air was cool and stale, the walls lined with faintly glimmering opals. My flashlight beam danced over the stone, revealing crude carvings etched into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize. "Lucas," I called out, "have you seen these before?" He frowned, running his fingers over the carvings. "No. And I've been to a lot of mines." The deeper we went, the more unsettling the carvings became. They depicted figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, always watching, always reaching. Then we found the pit. A massive, gaping hole in the earth, surrounded by abandoned tools and shredded ropes. The air here felt heavier, almost suffocating. As I leaned over the edge, a faint sound drifted up from the darkness, a low, rhythmic hum that sent chills down my spine. "Let's head back," Lucas said abruptly. We returned to the surface, but the unease lingered. As we packed up our equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, but every time I turned there was nothing there. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They seemed to come from all around, rising and falling like a chant. I sat by the fire, gripping my camera, when Lucas emerged from his tent, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could respond, the fire dimmed as if a great wind had passed over it. But the air was still. Then we saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms flickering like mirages. They were impossibly tall, their limbs unnaturally long, and their eyes glowing with an eerie, opalescent light. Lucas grabbed my arm. "Run?" We bolted toward the 4x4, but the figures moved faster than seemed possible, their limbs bending and stretching in ways that defied logic. As we reached the vehicle, one of them lunged, its hand grazing my shoulder. A searing cold shot through me, and for a moment the world blurred. I saw flashes of the pit, the carvings, and the miners, their faces twisted in terror as they fled from something unseen. Lucas shoved me into the passenger seat and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the figures, their hollow eyes staring as the vehicle roared to life. We drove through the night, the figures pursuing us for miles before finally fading into the darkness. When we reached the nearest town, Lucas refused to speak of what had happened. I reviewed my footage hoping to make sense of it. The recordings were distorted, filled with static and fleeting images of the figures. But the audio was clear, the whispers, the hum from the pit, and one chilling phrase repeated over and over. "You dug too deep." To this day, I don't know what we encountered in Black Hollow. Lucas left town shortly after, and the locals refused to answer my questions. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the hollow figures and hear the rhythmic hum. And I can't help but wonder, what else lies hidden beneath the red sands of the Outback?